Hi guys, welcome to Simply Scuba. So in today's comparison video, this is a bit of a heated topic at the moment. It's whether we go for a traditional, inexpensive, dare I say cheap spool, or a more expensive spool with some nicer features. Now there's sort of pros and cons on both sides of the argument. And this video is basically going to make it a little bit easier. So with me today, I've got the DIR Zone 33 meter spool, which is about 100 feet. And then we've got the Apex Lifeline 30 meter spool. So they're both 30 meter spools. One's more expensive, one's less expensive, but we're just going to go over the little differences and the pros and cons and kind of which is better for what type of diver. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so we're starting off with the cheaper spool. So this is the DIR Zone 33 meter spool. The spool itself is made out of Delrin, a sort of a plastic material. It's very square. As you can see, all of the line is a bright white color. This is a very traditional gauge sort of line, very white, and it's kind of round in cross section. They have given it a really big leader, which is quite nice. So that's particularly useful for sort of attaching it to a DSMB or sort of laying guidelines if you need to. But what they have done is they've overspun it. So you do have 30 meters on it, but it's very hard to access any of these holes. So if you want to sort of tie it off, it's kind of hard to physically get that line, especially if you're wearing clunky gloves, through that. So that's a bit of a pain. So what I do as soon as I get this home is I take a whole load of line off, keep that as spare, but then that will limit it down to maybe a 20 or 15 meter line. The bolt snap that they've given you, stainless steel double ender, nice action on it. It's pretty smooth. That one's a little bit sort of scratchy. That one's really nice. Decent size. If you're wearing gloves, that'll be fine. Yeah, decent sized leader on that. The finger hole on it is quite small, so you wouldn't be able to get a gloved finger through it, but a lot of sort of divers just tend to pinch that hole while they're paying out line. So it's not a deal breaker for me, but it's something worth considering. I never put my finger all the way through and let it run like that, just in case something bad happens. But overall, it's a good reel, or spool I should say. It's nice and compact, it's pretty tidy, it's pretty strong as well. The only thing that I don't really like about it is that it's a little bit overspun, so you're losing that sort of functionality. You'd have to do what they've done here and just kind of move some of that line away just so you can get a bolt snap sort of onto it. Then we move on to the more expensive one, the Apex Lifeline. So this is different in a few ways. The first thing is that the spool itself is made out of metals. This is an aluminium, it's anodized. It's not overspun, as you can see. They have put 30 meters onto it, but they've kind of oversized the spool to allow for it, so you can still really easily get to those sort of holes to tie things off onto. It's flared out either side as well. Instead of being just straight, it kind of curls away, so it's a lot easier to sort of wrap line back onto it. And as you can see, the line itself is brightly colored, and it has two different colors. I'll show you the yellow in a second. The main section of the line is this bright orange tape. It's kind of flat in cross section, and that just makes it a little bit easier to untangle. I actually have one of these myself when I go diving. I've got a couple of their Lifeline spools, and if they ever tangle, they're quite easy to unpick because instead of a round line, the flats, for some reason, it just makes it that much easier to untangle. Orange, quite easy to see in both blue and green waters. It stands out quite nicely, so it's really obvious to see. And then it runs to a small little swivel. So that just, again, it just allows your DSMB, if you're sending a DSMB up, it just allows that to turn and it's not going to tangle up the line or twist the line. And then we get to the leader at the front, which is yellow. Again, makes it really easy to sort of distinguish between the main line and the leader. Decent size as well, so you can fit your hand, you can fit the spool through it. And they also give you this little tag which I usually create manually with this type of, with a cheaper type of spool, but they've given you this, which is really handy, makes it very easy to feed it through, even if you've got big, clunky dry gloves, very quick and easy to feed through sort of anywhere, so that's really useful. I do make a small adjustment when I'm using them, but as an overall, that makes your life a lot easier. Bolt snap, double ender is a little bit bigger. This is like a 90, whereas this is about 100. So it's a little bit longer for sort of bigger gloves. It makes it a lot easier to sort of clip things off onto. Actions are fine, nice and smooth, and a decent solid build and finish to them. The finger hole is really big, so if you do have gloved hands, it's very big and it's rounded as well, which is quite nice. So if you're a bit more of a pinch grip, you can still pay out, but yeah, your fingers naturally go all the way through it. So they're the big differences. The sort of pros for me are the fact that it's not overspun, the metal is a little bit stronger. I mean, touch wood, I've never had a plastic spool break on me, but I know others have out there. But is it worth the main expense? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the specifications, sort of what metal and the sort of weight and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll look at a conclusion. Okay, so now we're getting down to the nitty gritty. So this one is about £28. So that's pretty cheap. You can pick these up sort of anywhere. Yeah, they do come in different lengths and whatnot, but I just went for the 30-meter range. £28 versus £69. So it's about, well, it's at least twice as expensive, but you're getting those sort of better materials and sort of better features. So then we're sort of weighing things up. The spool, so this is Dyneema, which is a sort of thermoplastic, I believe. It's pretty tough, it's pretty rigid, it's quite lightweight as well. As far as weight goes, there's not that much in it. Okay, it's made out of metal, but it's anodized aluminium, which is very light and corrosion resistant. There's not much in it as far as weight. Buoyancy, yeah, much the same. They're both gonna sink. Probably the apex will sink a little bit faster, but as long as it's clipped off, you should be fine. The line is one sort of different thing. So this is 2mm polyamide in white on the DIR zone, which is your pretty standard sort of line. It's got a decent thickness to it, but it's not too thick or clunky. The Lifeline has two different lines on it. So the leader, the yellow bit, so this is Dyneema, which is very strong and sort of abrasion resistant. So if you're tying this off onto things and sort of on sort of sharp objects, it's not going to sort of wear through quite as quickly. The main line itself is Elderid. Again, it's abrasion resistant. It's about 2mm thick. But it's thin, it's that kind of tape which I now prefer. And the bright colour just makes it a lot easier in my eyes. It really stands out in the water so that you can see it. And that's kind of it as far as specs. As far as size goes, the Lifeline spool is that little bit bigger. That's probably about 1/2 centimetre, probably getting onto 1 centimetre. But as far as thickness goes, it's not as thick. So it's a little bit wider, but it's a little bit shorter. It's still going to take up space in a pocket or sort of hanging off a D-ring. But if it's off a D-ring and it's out of the way, you're not going to notice either of them. Okay, so bringing it down, boiling it down, which do I prefer? As I've said, I've used both of them in the water, not these ones in particular. My ones are a bit more beaten up than this. And if I'm just going on a nice chilled out recreational dive, I use my Lifeline. It's nicer. And it's bright and colourful, so it stands out. It's really easy to see. The sort of the plastic ones, they definitely have their place. They do their job, and okay, they're cheaper, but I don't really see them as disposable. I've touched wood, I've never been in an experience where I've had to ditch a spool for whatever reason. I have had it where I've dropped one of my lifeline spools. Luckily, it was only my 15 meter, but I just wound that back up because they are tied on at the other end, which is always good to know. I always go towards the lifeline. It's got more features. It's just that little step up. Okay, it is much more expensive, but in the long run, it looks nicer, it feels nicer, it just works that little bit better. You don't have to put quite so much customizing time into it. I do a little bit to the leader so that you get a little section of line here that you can pull off if you're using clunky gloves. With these sort of style, you've got to unwind a lot. Okay, you do get spare line, which is always useful for sort of tying on bolt snaps and whatnot, but then your 30 meter spool isn't a 30 meter spool, it's a 20 or a 15. So I'm leaning towards the Apex Lifeline. Yes, it's more expensive, but it's got all those extra features. But of course, it's down to you guys, which is your favorite, and what type of spool do you use? Or do you use a reel? I prefer spools, they're neat and tidy. I don't need a handle or a kind of ratchet mechanism. It's just something else to go wrong, and it's just bigger and clunkier. But of course, what do you dive with? Let us know so that other people can make more informed decisions. Do you prefer sort of cheaper plastic reels, or do you invest in a more sort of feature-rich spool made out of metal? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and safe diving. We are an online dive store serving the UK and the world for all your diving equipment needs. So why not visit us at simplyscuba.com or click the box on your screen.